And that's the age-old question, isn't it? What makes men act the way that they do? Is it nature or is it nurture? Is it conditioned or is it something that men are born with? Shout out to Rob. Rob's been around the page for a while, and I know that he's asking this question in good faith. And these are just my thoughts on the subject. This is not, decisive scientific evidence. These are just my observations. Sure, by now we are all aware that we did not, in fact, just fall out of a coconut tree, but that we exist in the context of all in which we live and everything that came before us. So let's take a look at this question through that lens. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of the biological route when it comes to men and women, and I do believe that gender is mostly socialized. But there are some very interesting biological differences between the majority of girls and the majority of boys at birth. And these differences have been covered very extensively in a study done about 20 years ago called The Fragile Male by Sebastian Kramer. And so that's the study I'm going to be quoting from. So the big idea here is that due to humans' need for survival, there is no nurture without nature, and that nurture has developed to sustain nature. Let's see if I can connect all of that for you. Because at both the beginning and end of the day, this does come back to survival. So the study starts by saying this: the human male is on most measures more vulnerable than the female. Part of the explanation is the biological fragility of the male fetus, which is little understood and not widely known. A typical attitude to boys is that they are, or must be made, more resilient than girls. This adds social insult to biological injury. Culture and class make a difference to the health and survival of boys. The data presented here have implications for the clinical management of male patients as well as for the upbringing of boys. Basically, the study is saying men are neither more well-adjusted nor more resilient than women, and this difference starts at birth. I don't have the time to read this whole study to you, but this is actually a published study. Just type in the fragile male and this whole thing will pop up. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing which sections I'm sharing with you today. So just keep that in mind. By the time a boy is born, he's on average developmentally some weeks behind his sister. A newborn girl is the physiological equivalent of a 4 to 6 week old boy. The study goes on to say that this sets a pattern that researchers then saw in every stage of life between boys and girls. At the time a boy is born, the pattern seems set. Developmental disorders such as specific reading delay, hyperactivity, autism and related disorders, clumsiness, stammering, and Tourette syndrome occur 3 to 4 times more often in boys than girls, although girls, when they have such a disorder, may be more severely affected. It also says that conduct and oppositional disorder are at least twice as common in boys. So this next part comes towards the end of the study. Like I said, I'm not covering the whole thing today. You are free to look it up. I'll also tag a video in which I covered other parts of this study and what conclusions I had from there. But what it says here is, this is where we're going to tie it back to survival, okay? If newborn boys are less mature than girls, then they probably require more attention. And the study observed that parents tend to mimic newborn boys more than girls, suggesting that as caregivers, they have to work harder with boys. They also state that infant boys are more emotionally reactive than girls. They display more positive as well as negative affect, focus more on the mother, and display more distress and demands for contact than do girls. That to me sounds a little bit like main character syndrome is something that males have used in order to increase their chances of survival by being more emotionally needy and displaying more distress and demands for contact than do girls. Girls seem to develop interest and constancy of interest as well as self-regulation very early on. And even just at 6 months old, girls have been found to display interest expressions more frequently than males. Female infants have more open eyes and higher brow placements than male infants, which may serve to lead observers to quite different overall impressions about male and female sociability. Boys tended to be too excitable, and mothers did all they could to soothe and settle them at some cost to their development. Oh, because boys tend to express more neediness, they are also treated in infancy as with extra attention, which may lead them later on in life to expect that for no reason. Boys were also apparently more affected by maternal postnatal depression than girls, so they tended to sort of take it more personally, and it stuck with them into nursery school years long after the depression has lifted. That's another thing that sort of points to a self-centeredness to me. One of the most notable effects of this is inattentiveness and hyperactivity, which again, when you're not paying attention to things, it's very easy to sort of keep the focus just on yourself. It's easy to expect the world to just keep turning around you rather than other people, the people that you're not paying attention to. And this carries over into emotional states such as anger, whether this is because of a societally nurtured predisposition. When they did a study on communication styles of mothers with their 3-year-old children, the mothers did not judge any of their daughters to be angry, only their sons. I think this ties back to like emotional regulation, and is just something that a lot of girls are better at naturally, like when they come out of the womb, than boys are. And this sort of like muddies the waters of whether it is really nature or nurture. But I think survival plays the biggest role into it, and I'll tell you why. Now, what we see in nature is that a lot of the male species has very poor rates of survival and reproduction. We see that in most mammalian groups, there is typically only one male or very few males, because males' survival mechanisms tend to be different than females. Females tend to be more cooperative, more self-regulated, more resilient, better equipped for like long distance type things, whereas males are more predisposed towards risk, towards violence, towards, higher testosterone as a hormone to help them survive. Because other than that, they don't really have anything that nature needs on a large scale to keep going, to reproduce, to grow, and to prosper. Now, most males in the animal kingdom, they don't consciously recognize this. They don't consciously realize this. So what this looks like in the animal kingdom is that in most groups of mammalian tribes or creatures, communities or whatever, there are typically far fewer males than there are females. In a lot of cases, it's just one male. Like there's only one lion in a pride. There's only one rooster in a hen house. And that's because the female species is not prone to violence and risk-taking and reckless behavior, whereas the male population typically is. So they don't survive, they don't get along well with one another. Now, humans have a distinct advantage, right? They have the advantage of consciousness. They have the advantage of actually altering their perception of reality and what's important, and we're also tool-based creatures that have invented enough tools to actually make us comparably small creature, can't really run fast, doesn't have a lot of strength compared to other animals, doesn't have a lot of like animalistic advantages, but it has turned us into apex predators nonetheless, because we have been able to use our brain to figure out how to hoard resources, how to control even one another as humans, let alone the animal population, etc. And not only in my opinion, but also as evidenced by some of our earliest written laws and rules and expectations of conduct, men use their maybe even subconscious knowledge of these facts to flip this idea on its head, right? This is why we have so many countries where there are now so many more males than there are females. And those countries are not doing well. Things are not going well for neither males nor females. The countries that are doing well have a much more even split. And the countries that are the most progressive have like equal rights for men and women. Whereas the countries where most men survive have laws and rules and regulations on women to keep men in this place of the main character, even though nature doesn't consider them the main character. Basically like a really desperate survival attempt. They're living in the aftermath of it. And that's again because meaningful survival of a species depends on its ability to be friendly and cooperative. And a lot of males don't have that. When exposed to the distress of others, young boys are less sympathetic than girls. A group of 6-year-old girls and boys were listening to the recorded sound of a crying baby. Many more girls than boys spoke kindly to what they assumed was a real infant, while more than twice as many boys simply turned the speaker off. If that's not main character energy, then I don't know what is. They're like, I don't want to hear this shit. Done. Tracings of heart rate variability suggested that the boys were more anxious. They could not tolerate the infant's distress. So tell me, what is better for the survival of a species? What the girls did or what the boys did? Exactly. Males don't often contribute to the meaningful survival and thriving of their own species. Therefore, they have to artificially make themselves important and inextricable from society by making themselves the main character and by putting women down and by oppressing women, which then becomes the norm, which is what we call socialization. But it's all tied back into survival because the male species knows that its survival is not that important as the female species. And the study basically confirms this. So it says, before concluding that maleness is a genetic disorder, it is important to note that the foregoing data are embedded in social values about normality. A hominid male of say 500,000 years ago may have needed all the opportunities for risk-taking that he could get just to procreate. Charles Darwin noted this. Many male mammals fail in their primary biological goal, which is to reproduce. They risk instead being excluded, wounded, or killed by rivals. Rivalries in human societies are more complex. Perhaps competition for females has been replaced by competition with them. The survival skills required by our ancestors, such as how to calculate physical risk, are not very similar to those needed today, even though we still have most of the same genes. Male advantages in physical strength and spatial skills were probably more useful in the past. In contrast, while the preeminence of the few men who reach the very top of public life is barely dented by women, the modern male is now more often seen as lacking qualities associated with female, such as self-regulations of emotions and reflectiveness. It is clear that the male is more vulnerable from the beginning of life. Where caregivers assume that from birth a boy ought to always be tougher than a girl, his inborn disadvantage will be amplified. The data presented here have implications for the upbringing of boys. The more developmental problems there are, the more sensitive care is required. Yet difficult babies often receive less good care precisely because they are more difficult to look after. Biological and social constraints work together against the interests of the male. If parents were more aware of male sensitivity, they might change the way they treat their sons. Doctors too need to be aware that male patients may withhold their health concerns for fear of appearing needy or may ignore them altogether. This part of the study really goes to show that this male main character syndrome is still happening at the expense of the male. Basically, it's harder for men to get care because they have bought into the lie that they are stronger and more resilient and less sensitive than women, when that is, in fact, demonstrably untrue. Not only is main character syndrome hurting women in direct opposition to women's survival, it's also in direct opposition to the male survival. But they just can't see it because the main character syndrome is clouding their vision and their perception even of themselves. My conclusion of whether this is socialized or whether it's natural is almost irrelevant. It is the only way. It comes back to the video that you actually asked this question on. It's the only way for men to have survived this well and this far into the future as much as they have survived. This violence, this risk-taking, this main character syndrome, this hoarding of resources, oppression of women, the oppression of children, the oppression of animals, that's the way that men have survived. They have oppressed others instead of cooperating with them, and they have forced the rest of us into this competition instead of cooperation. This is what we're coming up against now. We're trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this moving forward into the future. There's simply too many men, and they all believe lies about themselves. But when we tie this all back to survival, that's when it makes sense. It's kind of pointless talking about these things in a vacuum, like is it socialized or is it natural? It doesn't matter. Our socialization is part of a survival instinct. And the people that have historically dictated our socialization are men. So it's both. They're the ones that needed to survive en masse, not women. Women have always had good chances of survival. Men used to fight wars over women. Men used to try and impress women at any cost. That's where all of their risk-taking behavior comes from. But the result of that was never supposed to be an equal amount of men and women, because that's always dangerous for women, as we see today, as we see in the statistics everywhere today. Men abuse women on a large scale, and children and animals and all of it. So it was never supposed to be like this. This is directly actually going against nature, but nature definitely plays a part in it too. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any other questions. Stay safe out there, ladies. I love you. Godspeed.
Y'all do not know more than activists who have been doing the work for as long as many of us have been alive. Especially when so many of you online activists didn't know that racism in the United States was still an issue until 2020. And then, even with that knowledge in your pocket, dropped the cause and moved on within a year or two. And honestly, it's upsetting and frustrating for so many people to just now realize that the American political system is broken and that we need change now that things are starting to impact them or there are things that they feel like they can't look away from. Because where have y'all been for the last multiple decades where marginalized people were telling you this? But even more upsetting is that now that it matters to you, you suddenly feel like you know more than everybody else who's ever done the work ever, including marginalized people. Like, y'all don't know more than Angela Davis does on activism. I don't know if y'all know more than Angela Davis does on making toast. And yet, I keep seeing people say things like, oh, Angela Davis has betrayed the cause because she's voting for Kamala. And I'm not telling you who to vote for because the election is tomorrow. You're gonna do what you need to do. But to act like other people, seasoned professionals, people who've dedicated their lives to doing the work, no less than you because they're doing something you aren't doing, is ridiculous. Especially when you've only been doing the work for 6 minutes and it hasn't even been 6 consecutive ones. Like, maybe consider for a second that you're not the moral authority on the nuances and complexities of activism and that you don't solely alone know the best path forward. And then maybe while you're at it, you can crack open one of those books y'all bought in 2020 but clearly didn't read and maybe learn something. Even if all you learn is, I don't agree with this person, but they still know more than I do in this field and they're still a voice worth listening to. Because y'all are acting real buck wild when you and I both know that 6 months after this election ends, y'all will go back to your regularly scheduled program and leave the people who've been doing the work for the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 60 years to carry on. What good are we to Palestinians if we're not around to advocate for their cause? Since marginalized people usually do the bulk of the advocacy work, women, queer folk, people of color, and there are attacks directly on our lives right now and our well being, what good are we to the Palestinian cause? Because I'm not upset with y'all for voting the way that you feel like you need to vote, but I am sick and tired of seeing, well, I'm not going to vote for G side. If that puts us all on the line, then so be it. Why are you so comfortable with sacrificing everybody else so that you can feel good? Like, why do y'all think it's a flex to be like, I am comfortable with sacrificing my fellow activists and fellow advocates and marginalized people so that I can feel good about myself? Because I know that somebody's going to win tomorrow, but at least I didn't participate. So if it comes at the cost of your life and well being, so be it. Like, because I'm an advocate for others, because I care, I'm not comfortable with sacrificing a nation full of people of color to the violent rhetoric of that man. I'm not sacrificing the reproductive health care of women across the nation so that we can all kick the bucket on the birthing table. I am not sacrificing my queer and trans friends to an endless future of anti-LGBTQ legislation and the uptick in HATE crimes that we see every single time he's in office. And because I care about Palestine and Congo and Sudan, and I know that there is no person on the ballot that will do the thing I want them to do, I'm not comfortable sacrificing the people willing to advocate for them. I'm not. And I'm not saying that voting third party is greenlighting that sacrifice, but saying that you're okay with making that sacrifice is ridiculous. You say you're not voting for G side, which is fair because I'm assuming you're sick and tired of seeing the violence, the loss of life, the callousness. So why do you then flex that you're okay with opening up violence to other marginalized people? It's hypocritical, it's messy, it's counterproductive, it's violent, and it's privileged, and I'm sick of seeing it. Vote the way that you feel like you need to vote, but pretend that you have the empathy and knowledge to feel bad about it. Y'all clearly don't understand the importance of reproductive health care, so let's chit chat. Also, my baby's holding my finger. It's precious. First things first, we all need access to terminations, and we need medical professionals who can comfortably and safely perform them. Not only because people deserve the right to choose what to do with their own bodies, which clearly isn't a big deal to y'all, but because sometimes the solution to things like a miscarriage is a termination, and without it, you bleed out and lose your life. Additionally, people will continue to have terminations even without the quote unquote right to do so. It will just start to, cost people their lives like it used to. Second, the most dangerous time for a person in a DV relationship is when they're leaving. The second most dangerous time is when they're pregnant. If a pregnancy will not get you, there is a chance your partner will, and they will end your life. But the thing that I really want to drive home, the thing that y'all don't seem to understand, is that they want to make terminations a felony. Guess what you cannot do as a felon? Instead of applying pressure to have this genocide ended now, as opposed to January when we have a new president, y'all want to tamper with people's voting rights for the rest of their lives. People, namely women, will not be able to vote. They will not be able to hold down a job. They will not be able to buy a house in many circumstances. This is a one-way ticket to going back to the 1950s. It's not just about your access to termination. It's about your access to health care and honestly, many, many other rights. Plus, because terminations would be a felony for all involved, fewer and fewer people are willing to practice gynecology. And that means that things as simple as, getting your birth control changed or having a yeast infection can become life-threatening. I know y'all don't take pregnancy seriously because y'all don't like kids and don't like women, but it's not just about your access to choose. This has repercussions on your life in almost every single way you can think of, and y'all just don't care. And I'm not comfortable sacrificing those people and our rights so that I can pretend like I'm doing something productive to end the G side. I saw this post earlier today that was like, Disney gave us high expectations when it comes to dating men. And at first I was like, what are you talking about? But then I thought about it and I was like, that's kind of true. At first I was like, do you mean the Disney that raised a generation of lovesick, romance-centered women? That Disney, based on the movies of like a series of child brides, is that Disney? If you put that information in a box and set it to the side for a second, you'll see that the bulk of those princes didn't play about their girl, not even a little bit. Especially if you separate the movies away from the original lore and just look at the Disney movies as Disney movies, even the foot guy doesn't play about Cinderella in the next two movies. I mean, they're fighting dragons, sea witches, evil exes. They're giving libraries. They're returning girls to their long lost parents. They're taking on grand adventures to go rescue their sisters from the ice palace. Like, they're doing the thing. You're dating a guy who said to your face that he wouldn't fight for you, that if the opportunity ever arose, he would just give up. You are begging and pleading on your hands and knees for a text back like a feral dog in the woods looking for a bone. Yes, the Disney princesses might have been young brides, but at least their men weren't unsure on if they wanted to be in a relationship with them or not. And I feel like at least a very small part of us, when we all got wrapped up in the whole like, I love love, I want to be in love, I want to marry my prince, live happily ever after, we forgot that he's actually supposed to move heaven and earth literally to want to be with you. Literally. Not the other way around, babe. Disney did teach us that. If other stuff aside, Disney did teach us that. We just need to listen. Conservative estimates say that the civil rights movement took about 10 years, although most people commonly go with about 20. That is 20 years of protesting, of boycotting, of advocating, of attending and disrupting political events, of losing lives on the front line. That is 20 years of work. And it didn't even end racism. We absolutely had significant strides in protecting the rights and freedoms of black folk, but it didn't end at the root of the issue. And y'all act like we are going to dismantle the American political system in one election when y'all didn't even lock in until at best November of last year. I don't know if because y'all read books in a day, you think that systemic change happens in a day, or if because you watch so much TV that you think the power of unity and friendship will fix this, but I have bad news. All of the deep structural work that y'all want to get done, not the obvious stuff like a ceasefire, but the deep changing the American system stuff that y'all want to see is not happening in this election, and it never was. And to think that it is to be incredibly naive. U.S. citizens and the world deserve better than the two candidates that we have. We deserve better than this political system. We deserve better than this reality. But marginalized people have been telling all this for decades, and you've been ignoring them. And just because it clicked just now, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, doesn't mean that the work is suddenly going to be done overnight because you're ready for that to happen. Barring the fact that most people are going to lose interest in this by November 6th, I'm glad that people are finally ready to do the work. But we need to accept the fact that we are going to have to do this work for a long time, that change is not coming overnight, and it certainly isn't happening over the course of one election, especially if you decide to sit out of the election. Go vote. It is the barest minimum that you can do. When we said that Trump and Harris were two sides of the same coin, we meant that they would both literally uphold the American imperialist regime because that is their job and because no regime, no system is going to just let you dismantle it. But we did not literally mean that they're the same. They're not the same person. They don't have the same ideologies. And while they might both do harm, it will not be the same harm. It will not remotely look the same at all. People wouldn't be trying to steal your vote literally out of the mailbox and sign it fraudulently if your vote didn't matter if they were the same. People wouldn't be lighting ballot boxes on fire if they were the same. And the fact that one incites a political climate in which those things happen or incites, threats against immigrants in different states or threats upon the lives of trans and LGBTQ folk and threats upon women should tell you all that you need to know, that they're not actually the same. If they were truly the same, if they were truly identical, we would not see people of all walks of life and all political backgrounds rallying behind one black woman who was tossed into the election like 4 months before it happened. We, of course, need to do the work of uprooting the U.S. imperialist regime. That work will not be done by the president. So if you haven't voted already, if you're undecided, if you're just thinking you're going to sit this one out, don't. Please. They're not literally the same. If nothing else, one will let you vote again in 4 years. The other is doing everything they can to keep you from voting now. It takes white and white passing leftists 24 hours or less to be anti-black towards black people, specifically black women, when they do not agree with them. You can set a watch to it. And until that changes within y'all, until y'all are able to have conversations with somebody and disagree with them without jumping straight to anti-blackness, we will never accomplish liberation, because liberation is a collective effort. And y'all keep stabbing the people who are actually on your side, if you would cut your listening ears on for a second, in the back every time. At no point have I yelled. I don't yell because I don't know if you know this, but I'm usually carrying around a sleeping baby. So raising my voice isn't something I do. Nor do I ever tell y'all who to vote for, because I firmly believe and have always believed that voting is how you express your voice in this nation in terms of politics. And so I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what I do. I'm going to tell you what I think, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. But because I don't speak softly, because I say things bluntly and directly, because I don't smile in your face and hold your hand and agree with you on everything, you always take it as yelling. You always see it as confrontation. So until y'all dismantle that misogynoir that lives within you, we will never know progress and we will never know liberation, because y'all will continuously stab your allies in the back. Y'all try to disguise your whiteness and your white privilege under moral objectivity so that you can pretend to get upset every time people don't agree with you, and yet you expose yourself every single time within 24 hours. Regardless of if Kamala wins or loses, after this election, y'all need to leave black women alone. Just leave us be. Because some of this is obvious and we saw coming from a million miles away, but to know that Trump is doing better amongst black men than before, or to know that so many leftist allies, whomever, are voting third party in major swing states for practically nothing, is exhausting. Because when push comes to shove, the people whose rights y'all are tampering with, the people whose lives y'all are tampering with, will first be black women again. And I remember after 2020 and even 2016, when everybody thought that they learned something, and so they were all, oh, we should listen to black women. They seem to know what they're talking about, over and over and over again. And I'm not saying you have to listen to black women, but for a moment I had hope that people were actually listening and learning and doing the work they said they were. And yet, to know that we are all sitting here holding our breath, hoping that an insurrectionist, rapist felon isn't going to be the president of the United States again, means that y'all didn't actually listen and learn. It means that y'all actually hate us more than you love yourself. And with that being the case, do not ask us to attend your protest. Do not ask us to organize. Do not ask us to do any more labor. Do not ask us to lead and direct or anything. Just leave us be. And I'm not saying that black women need to stop caring. We will always care. I know I will always care. But stop looking for us. Stop asking us to pick up the pieces and to regroup and direct and lead. Don't hit our line. Don't ask us to lead your protest. Don't ask us to organize. We'll show up if we want to. But honestly, I'm tired, and I'm tired for my sisters to know that we keep trying to do the work and keep trying to do the labor that nobody else wants to do, only to end up the first people y'all disregard. And to see it happen in real time, I'm over it. This morning, I might cry until noon. I might cry all day long. But at some point, I'm gonna get up and get going, because I have other things to do. See, when my mom left the house this morning to go to work, she said two things that really stuck with me. One of them was that she wasn't going to sit around and cry all day because she had other things to do. And the second was that Donald Trump doesn't live in her house. She lives in her house. And I didn't take this as a disregard of people's very valid feelings of grief and sadness, including my own, nor did I take it as a, it's just all going to be okay at the end thing, because that's not it. But it's more that my mom, ever the realist, has felt her feelings or will feel her feelings on her own time, but looked at the lay of the land as it is now and saw that there's work that needs to be done and knows that we need to do it. And that really sat with me. The work will be different now. The work will look and feel vastly different, will ask vastly different things. The obstacles will be completely different. I'm going to cry until I'm done crying. I'm going to feel my feelings and process this grief, and I'll probably be processing that for a long time off and on. But until I'm done crying, that's what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to get up and wash my face of yesterday's makeup and try to find any path forward, because the sun is rising on November 6th, for better or for worse. And Donald Trump doesn't live in my house, which means that I and I alone will decide when I am ready to get up from this space of grief and go control the very few things that I feel like I can. Because while I will cry until I have no tears left, I also know that I have other things to do. And I alone will decide what that looks like.
So did anybody else notice that the both times that he ran against the woman he won, but the time he ran against the man he lost? Y'all really do dislike women and y'all want to keep men in charge, and it shows.
I hate when I'm reading a book and I can tell that a character that I've already gotten attached to within the first 100 pages at some point in the series is going to kick the bucket. I can't do this. You should have left it in the docs. I don't even know if it's going to happen yet, but you should have left it in the
Not y'all trying to silence people from talking about politics on Book Talk. Giving me the heebie-jeebies. Like, I fear that we are not on the same part of the internet, because as far as I'm concerned, Book Talk has a lot of different sectors. We have a lot of different categories, and one of those categories is simply talking about books that revolve around social issues or political issues. Are we just completely erasing those people? On top of the fact that some of my favorite genres are romance, fantasy, etc., I can still come up on here and talk about politics. Guess what? Guess why? Because at the end of the day, y'all are saying this is in the name of escapism. I still have to wake up every morning as a black woman. Oh, shocker! I know, it's so crazy! But truthfully, to say, it is one thing to say you shouldn't bash people for their opinions, which, but like, it is a completely different ball game to say that you think that politics doesn't have a place on this side of the internet. Oh, brother. Let me hydrate.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. And the reason why I don't give a fuck is because this is more than just about what you guys specifically voted for. This is a collective wake-up call to the fact that men collectively don't fucking give a fuck about or respect us. It's good that Black men were out there voting and trying to make sure that our rights were secured and all that stuff. Good. Applauding a fish for fucking swimming. Good for you. What a lot of men are understanding right now is that this is a collective reminder to every woman everywhere, every woman that's paying attention, every woman that is not living and breathing for you guys' validation, that you guys collectively hate us in everyday life, including the ones that went and voted for Harris, including the ones that every single time things happen to women, you guys find a way to deflect, you guys find a way to dismiss the situation, you guys find ways to degrade and humiliate and contribute to the subjugation of women every single day. That is a reminder of that. It is also a reminder of the fact that we are fighting alone. We are not fighting with you guys alongside us. That is not what's happening. That is not what's happening every single day. That is why we're fed the fuck up. We're fed up. We're fed up because you guys standing in solidarity with us and voting in one way, it does not change the fact that this is a reminder that men collectively do not give a fuck about us. They do not give a fuck about us. Regardless of who they voted for, it is a reminder that you guys don't give a single fuck about us. It does not matter if we're your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your girlfriends, your wives. It does not matter what type of proximity we have to. It doesn't matter if we are the perfect traditional wife. It doesn't matter if we are leaning into purity culture and not sleeping with anybody until marriage and following religious values and any of that. It doesn't matter if we're on the other end of the spectrum and doing whatever we want with our bodies and not leaning into purity culture and not leaning into religion and stuff like that. It does not matter if we are literally the perfect patriarchy's princess or the fucking bane of the patriarchy's existence. You guys still fucking hate us. And that is what this is. This is a wake-up call to so many women that no matter how liberal, no matter how conservative, you guys just hate us. It does not matter how qualified we are. It does not matter the credentials. It does not matter what we do. We could do everything perfectly and you guys will still fucking hate us. The world, the entire world, including other women. That is what this is. It's not just about like, oh, a bunch of men voted for Trump. That is not all that it is. It is a reminder that collectively the world hates women and girls, and they hate us more than they hate anything else, more than racism, more than pedophilia, more than any form of bigotry or terrible thing you can think of. Women are not hated. Women are hated more than that thing. That's the reality. And that's what a lot of women are realizing. And I thought I already knew that, but this is just like a worldwide reminder. Like, we fucking hate you guys. And that's just what's happening right now. I know you guys have this really intense need to be like, not all men, and like try to earn yourself brownie points and whatever. But collectively in the everyday, you guys are so fucking disrespectful and so fucking misogynistic that it does not matter that you went out and voted for. Like, good for you. That's amazing. Of course, I should be able to expect that. But in your everyday lives and your everyday interactions, you guys enable misogyny. You enable abuse against women. You enable so many behaviors that lead to this hatred for women. So I don't give a fuck who you voted for. I really don't. I really don't give a fuck, because this is a reminder that collectively, no matter what we fucking do, there is nothing stronger than the collective hatred of women.
This feels like one of those times where I'm supposed to have something like really poignant and groundbreaking and incisive and just like finger on the pulse to say, and I've got nothing. All I can think about is this monologue that I did when I was in high school. It's from a play called The Laramie Project, which, like, if you were gay and in high school theater, you probably know the play that I'm talking about. You might even know the monologue that I'm talking about. So I will spare too deep of an explanation of what that play is about, but it's essentially a play that is like partially nonfiction. It's based on the murder of Matthew Shepard, which was a very violent hate crime. Matthew Shepard was a white gay man who was killed for being gay. It's that simple. And the Laramie Project is essentially about his town reacting to that fact. And there's a monologue that I did when I was probably about 16, and it's a monologue of somebody like paraphrasing and responding to something else somebody said in a town hall. So mind you, this is not going to be exactly what's said, but the part that just keeps echoing in my brain is we went to the candle vigil, and this guy got up there and he says, "Come on everybody, let's show the world that Laramie isn't this kind of town." but it is that kind of town. I mean, it's just like totally circular logic. You know what I mean? Like, this happened here. So it is that kind of town. People want to remove themselves from this, but the truth is, we are like this. We are like this. And I don't remember the whole thing perfectly, but I remember that ending vividly. She just keeps saying, in important context, the woman that this interview is referencing, like they did actual interviews with the people of Laramie and then wrote a play about it. This woman was Muslim, so it's a Muslim woman responding to a hate crime, which is, I think, a particular context. And she just keeps saying, we are like this. We are like this. With a different, there's a different emphasis on a different word every time she says it. And I think that's stuck in my brain because it feels like that's where we're stuck at. It feels like we don't want to admit that we are like this. Not all of us, for sure, but as a nation, we are like this. Like, Trump might be the first Republican candidate to win the popular vote in a very long time. And he did it on a platform of blatant bigotry and alignment with fascism. We are like this. And we're not gonna move forward until we can all admit that. And you know what? The more I think about it, I don't want to hear shit about a male loneliness epidemic. Save it. Save it for your journal. Save it for your mother. Save it for your grandmother. Save it for your next argument with your father. I don't care where you put it. Put it anywhere but here, because I don't give a fuck. Look at the way that men voted in this election. Is this a men's loneliness epidemic, or is it the natural consequences of men being reared in such a way that actively puts them against women's rights, and then they grow up and they expect to be able to marry a woman? Is it a male loneliness epidemic, or are you all unbearable and doing, like, we've been telling you you're unbearable via magazine, stand-up comedy, YouTube video, every form of communication known to man. And what have you done? You got worse. You create.
Here's one more thing I have to say, because I keep thinking, unfortunately. Haven't been able to stop thinking, I'm afraid. Another thing that I genuinely cannot fathom is the fact that if Kamala Harris had won, there is like a real potential that probably white men specifically, they would have somehow fabricated a reality in which them feeling the way that I feel right now as someone who is black and a woman, they would have fabricated a reality where they were justified for feeling that way. Does that make sense? Like, I can't, but, and I believe that to be true. I believe that if that had happened, there would absolutely be white men in this country that would feel the way I feel right now and believe that they were justified in feeling so, at the prospect of having a president that does not threaten them in any way, that has not word for word, bar for bar, dehumanized the group, plural, of people that they belong to, but they would have still felt that way. And that is an alarming thing. The fact that they equate people, the person in charge not being a white man, to what I feel currently is mind-boggling, but I'm almost positive that they would. I'm almost positive that they do. And the thing about that is I'm afraid for a multitude of groups of people. I'm afraid for groups of people that I don't even belong to. And I still believe that somehow, if Kamala Harris had won, white men would have convinced themselves that they could feel as threatened as I currently feel and as I feel for other groups of people, for no group of people but themselves. And then, you know what, I did say men, but that 70% of white women that voted for Trump, you too. You hung women out to dry. And people of color and a whole bunch of other people. But anyways.
So Trump has won, but I want to talk about Canada. Now, I'm a Canadian and our abortion rights are also under attack in Canada. And I'm going to give you how to talk to other people about this, because even myself, when I try to talk to people about this, or people are for Pierre Poilievre, they will argue with me and deny that this is happening because one, they think that we're better somehow or smarter than the States, but the reality is there's a lot of people who are just as bad and would vote the same way as the Americans. Pierre Poilievre himself is very upfront about the fact that he is pro-choice, and so is his wife, as is Donald Trump. But everyone surrounding Pierre Poilievre, the entirety of the Conservative Party, is not pro-choice. They are pro-life, which means that although Pierre himself might feel differently, if there are votes in the that come through in bills and they're changing laws, he won't be the one making the decision because the entirety of his party is pro-life. They are not coming after these rights in Canada in the same way that the US is, because they know that majority of Canadians are pro-choice. What they are doing is they are introducing bills that give rights to fetuses in utero, meaning they're trying to introduce bills that talk about the fetus in utero essentially being the equivalent of the mother. So therefore, giving that fetus rights, giving that fetus bodily autonomy. So far, none of those things have gotten through, but they have voted in favor of all of those things repeatedly. And there are bills that have nothing to do with fetuses' rights, where they are slipping things in and trying to get it passed, regardless, to try and attack our rights that way. So many people in Canada don't like Trudeau, and I don't blame you. I'm not somebody who is a super big liberal. I just take both sides and look at it and go, what is the best for the most amount of people? And I'm not going to lie, watching the American election, all that kept crossing my mind personally was the fact that I failed to underestimate how much men vote in their own interests and completely disregard what's in the best interest of other people. And not only that, but the white women who voted against their best interests and the best interests of all of the minorities around them, because they prioritize the fact that they are white over the fact that they are women. Now, I am white presenting, but I am Indigenous, and I actually qualified to go and get dual citizenship in the United States. And I've been waiting to see the results of the election because I wanted to see what happened before I made my decision. And I will not be getting my dual citizenship because I cannot imagine being on a registry or a list of a minority in the United States and or having their foreign policy affect me and having to get drafted for their wars. In Alberta, there's a woman, Danielle, who is very against trans people, which is why most people are voting in her favor. However, what she is doing is taking the healthcare system in Alberta and giving it to a church organization that doesn't offer reproductive care. So even though you have the right to access said care, the hospitals and doctors will not have the ability to perform said care. I grew up very religious, very Catholic, and I've had family members who had to get what is considered abortion care as they tried to have babies because the baby wouldn't have a heartbeat. Things of that nature happened where there was complications with their pregnancy and they had to get what is called a DNC, which is an abortion. And they wouldn't be alive today if they hadn't been able to access that care. On the east side of our country already, they are having a very hard time accessing reproductive care because all of the places that offer this care are being shut down. There's, I think, one location where they can go to get some abortion care. And even in Alberta, the rural areas, you have to travel into the city to get care. What good are having rights if you cannot exercise those rights because there's nowhere to go to get your rights and care that you need? And this is how they're attacking it in Canada. So please don't allow the fact that Pierre Poilievre says that he is pro-choice. Please don't allow that to have you vote against your own rights and the rights of people around you because he's saying something while everyone around him is pro-life.
Papa Rome was wrong. We didn't want a feminine nomenon. Apparently, we wanted a felalalalalan.
Okay. The good news is that men hate us. So, there's no point in catering to them. They're gonna hate us anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no point in like, does he think I'm rude? Does this guy think I'm rude? He already hates you. Who cares? Who cares if he thinks I'm rude? Oh, am I being loud? Am I being loud? I don't want to be loud. They hate you. Be loud. Are they gonna hate you more? Okay. What? They already hate you. One man here or there may not, but men, as a rule, they hate you. So let go. Stop catering to them. You will not win. And I think we knew this, but I don't want to say, I'm feeling this. They hate us. So, let go. Let go, be free, and chop off your own hair, and scream in the street, and eat the cereal in the aisle in the grocery store before you buy it, and then buy it. Maybe, no, I'm not gonna say that. Buy it. Buy the cereal. Be who you would be if you weren't trying to get men to like you, because they won't. It's a waste of time.
We have been treating politics like it's like rooting for our favorite football team. Do you realize that idolizing any politician is bad? Do you realize that Trump supporters would die for Trump and Kamala supporters are only voting for her because she's the best Democratic candidate? And I think that shows who has rationale and who doesn't. It's not about who won, it's about whose policies won. It's about what we're about to see happen to our world. So, people commenting on my last post, it is what it is.
My genuine question to all the people who are saying Book Talk is not a political space: why didn't y'all just post the book haul today? Why are y'all coming on here saying that you don't want to talk about politics, but you're talking about politics by saying you don't want to talk about politics? You should have posted the book review. I don't know what...
Since we're talking about book bans, this morning I woke up to my account on here being banned. And I don't want to make any assumptions, but it did come a few short hours after I started talking about how I think we should talk about politics on Book Talk. That this is a space where it should be open forum to discuss our political and social opinions. I thought this would be a good time to talk about some of my favorite books that have themes. So let's get into it. My Nespresso wanted me to have a good day today. This is good. Starting off with my current read that I can already tell is going to be a favorite, The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, period. Another R.F. Kuang, Babel. This is one of my favorite books of all time. If you've been following me for a while, you know this. I think that this book is going to tell you a lot about yourself. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was actually a really random find for me. Not random, it's a very popular book, but it was very random that I decided to pick it up at a point in the summer where I wasn't really reading fantasy, but I'm so glad that I did. I need to read more N.K. Jemisin. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This may surprise some people, but think about it, you know? The entire Hunger Games trilogy. I realized that I don't have the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes next to me, but that too. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This was a banger. Netflix, bring the show back. River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I think Rebecca Ross, her writing is just... Lastly, Parable of the Sower. I also read this year, and I annotated the ever-living hell out of this book. I have so many underlinings. This was one of the most impactful reads for me this year. I love talking about books in this space. I love talking about all different types of books, and most of all, I love being able to share my opinions.
You know, as sad as I am and as disappointed as I am in a lot of Americans, I'm also very sad for Kamala, because I know that she had literally every odd stacked against her, and she had literally like 3 months to try and win this thing, and she was working her ass off. Oh my God. She was working her ass off. Not only is she black, she's a woman. And to lose to a convicted felon. I said I'll never cry on the internet, but to have to be a woman and you have to be damn near perfect And people are picking her apart for literally everything. While this man gets to be cruel, be vile, be a horrible human being, be a bad businessman, be a criminal, and get to be president. Like, how is that okay? Like, I just cannot wrap my brain around it. I really cannot. And I just don't understand how people don't see that. Like, just even on a moral level, he is not a good person. Like, no, you're never going to find a politician that you really like. He has literally brought out the worst in people. And if January 6th did not show you that, it's like some of y'all will never get to see it. And I'm so disappointed in some immigrants. He has said some of the most disgusting things about us. And some of y'all turned around and casted a vote for that man. When I say that, I'm so mad. I'm so angry. Because it's like, I know other people are mean and I know other people in this world are vile, but to see that there are so many, my level of trust is down. My level of faith is down. As a mom, I'm so sad. Oh, I'm so mad.
Nothing tells me everything I need to know about a person faster than an Instagram story the day after the election of like a bunch of red, white, and blue hearts. And like, you know, some of us voted for him and some of us voted for her, but we have to coexist and we have to love each other. Politics cannot separate us. Just shut up and say you voted for him. You're not subtle. I hate Trump supporters. I hate pussies. Say who you are.
And you know what's crazy is that 364 days out of the year, I agree with you. Like, I know that you're new here. You're clearly just somebody who saw that video and decided to fire off a snarky comment. Because I'm CEO of The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. I mention that text probably every other video. I've made countless videos talking about how one of the biggest mistakes with second wave feminism was that white women came to the movement angrier at their husbands than they were wanting to build community. I've talked 4 hours, probably, cumulatively, about how the patriarchy is as damaging to men as it is to everybody else. I've done the sympathetic route. I've done it, and you know what? At no point has that sympathetic route actually prohibited me from experiencing misogyny or actually benefited me in any way. That is something I do 364 days out of the year just because I believe it's the right thing to do. So I get one day where I tell y'all that you dropped the ball. You dropped the fucking ball, because even if you did vote for Harris, you still dropped the ball. And you want to know how I know that? Because 364 days out of the year, you expect me to be the one taking the sympathetic route instead of doing it yourself. How about you instigate that, motherfucker?
We control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again.
What if I said one of my issues with the 4B movement is that it doesn't go far enough? What if I said motherfuckers like him need to get jumped? No, I'm sorry. It's genuinely funny that I keep getting men, like, commenting and messaging me, like, there's nothing you can do, we won, there's nothing you can do, go make me a sandwich. Bitch, this is TikTok. You're not the fucking president, okay? I can still block your bitch ass. There's nothing you can do. Oh, bitch. I know I look like a My Little Pony, but do you think I run my mouth the way I do because I don't know how to fight?
Let's talk about the rise of the biracial black girl in Hollywood and what it means for the future of black female representation on screen. I want to start with the visual of Zendaya because I think there's no better person to really represent the success of mixed race women or even mixed race people in general on screen than Zendaya. That being said, the purpose of this video is not to bash Zendaya or anybody else that's going to be brought up in this video. Rather, I think Zendaya and the folks I'm going to be mentioning are examples of a much larger pattern that we're seeing in Hollywood that's indicative of a systemic issue related to colorism and anti-blackness within the media. Ultimately, this issue does not fall on the shoulders of one or two people, but rather will require extensive industry reform. So just keep that in mind. Now let's get into the video. If you haven't noticed, every coming-of-age show on Netflix, Hulu, Prime, etc. typically has a light-skinned biracial black girl as a lead or as a supporting character. Exhibit A, Outer Banks. Exhibit B, Never Have I Ever. Exhibit C, 13 Reasons Why. And Exhibit D, Ginny and Georgia. Now you might be wondering, okay, like who cares? Why are we talking about this? Ultimately, this is an issue worth discussing because one of the biggest criticisms that's been voiced by Black women, as well as just Black folks in general, is this dwindling representation of unambiguous Black women on screen, particularly as main characters. For example, in the early 2000s, we had shows like Ant Farm, True Jackson VP, and Coco Jones starring in Let It Shine. But unfortunately, what we're now seeing is this trend of light-skinned biracial girls playing fully Black characters. Let's take a look. We have Amandla Stenberg in The Hate U Give, who is the daughter of these two folks over here, Zendaya and Casey Undercover, Yara Shahidi in Blackish, and also I think it's important to mention that like a lot of the folks in the Blackish cast actually are mixed race, and that's a whole nother discussion because Kenya Barris has come under fire for his representation of the Black family. I don't know if anybody remembers Kenya's show Black AF, but this was heavily criticized for its light-skin casting and the way at which it's felt like he was trying to present a very diluted form of the Black family by only having light-skinned, racially ambiguous Black children. Looking at how biracial Black girls are becoming the sole form of representation for Black femininity on screen is one piece of the puzzle, but it's also important to look at what happens when we have a biracial Black girl and a Black girl in the same show. And I think the best example of this is High School Musical, the musical, the series, starring Sophia Wiley and Dara Renee. From episode 1, Courtney, played by Dara Renee, is very much positioned as Nini, played by Olivia Rodrigo's Black best friend, her sidekick, and she's sassy, she's kind of aggressive, and it honestly reeks of the angry Black woman stereotype. Yet Sophia Wiley's character, Gina, is very much positioned as a lead and a character with substance and depth. It's also worth mentioning that Gina's love interest got significantly more screen time and attention compared to Courtney's. Like, why did we never see this guy? Or this guy? Like, you really never saw Courtney and Jet or Courtney and Howie together all that much. Yet the bulk of season 4 revolved around Gina and Ricky's love story. And on that note, one trend I'm noticing is the white boy and the biracial Black girl being put together as love interests. This happens in Outer Banks, Spider-Man, and Ginny and Georgia. Now, I think this is really interesting because I think it represents a sharp contrast from what I was exposed to in terms of interracial relationships on screen. The very first memory I have of seeing interracial couples was really Rags with Keke Palmer and Max Schneider. And while we still have fully Black girls being with white guys on screen, it's really interesting how I'm seeing less and less of this, and like I said, more of the white boy and the biracial Black girl. This ultimately raises the larger question of, does Blackness have to be diluted to be marketable? I don't know if you remember, but during the pandemic, Coco Jones released a video about what happened to her career and why she kind of fell off after Let It Shine. And in this video, she talks about how she was constantly told she was not marketable enough. Now, if you're watching that video in live time, you would see that a lot of people were commenting / comparing her to Zendaya, and how, you know, despite the fact that Zendaya was never mentioned by name, that's what a lot of people jumped to. In no way am I trying to promote division between Coco Jones and Zendaya, but what's interesting is that they both were on the come up on Disney Channel around the same time, the early 2010s, and whereas Zendaya got Shake It Up and all of these major opportunities, Coco Jones really wasn't left with much. Now, I'm so proud of Coco Jones because she's now a Grammy winner, she's on Bel Air, she's worked with Renee Rapp and Justin Timberlake, and Disney was a fool to really fumble that opportunity. It is really heartbreaking to see how a dark-skinned girl like Coco Jones was constantly passed over. And it really enforces this larger point that I'm trying to make, where it seems like the marketability of Blackness is contingent upon having a Black female in close proximity to whiteness through a romantic relationship or a friendship, or by simply casting a Black girl that is half white. If you haven't noticed, there is definitely a biracial look in Hollywood. From what we've been discussing, it should be clear that the ideal biracial has white features, sand color / graham cracker colored skin, and 3B or 3C hair. This is important because despite the fact that Zendaya and Laura Harrier were both in Spider-Man and both of them are biracial, it seems like Zendaya is often the one that's most coded as biracial, whereas Laura Harrier is more positioned to be seen as a fully black woman. And we can infer that that is most likely because she's slightly darker than Zendaya and has different features. But what's problematic about Zendaya serving as one of the few examples of black femininity on screen is that it really oversimplifies what it means to be a mixed race person, and in this case a mixed race woman. Mixed race black people come in all different shades, have different features, and there's no one way to be biracial, and there should be no ideal biracial look. So when you constantly put out biracial girls that all look the same and have similar features, it upholds this idea that there's only one way to be biracial. And it's also harmful to fully black girls because they're really not seeing themselves in actresses like Zendaya. And while you could argue that Zendaya does look like some fully black girls who just came out light-skinned but have 2 black parents, at the end of the day, the majority of black girls with 2 black parents do tend to look darker than Zendaya. And so to have her be, their representation is very much misleading and ultimately harmful. While Zendaya has acknowledged that she is Hollywood's version of an acceptable black girl, mere acknowledgement isn't enough. Ultimately, what we need to see is reform from the very top, particularly within casting. Right? A casting director is the gatekeeper when it comes to a project. They decide who's getting the job and who's not. Therefore, if casting departments aren't diverse and they don't have a wide range of people with different skin tones and experiences and perspectives, then it's very unlikely that we're going to see any change. I want to end this video by saying that I am really proud of Zendaya, and as a mixed race person, it is really cool to see more mixed race representation on screen. That being said, we do have to ask the question, is biracial black progress necessarily progress for all black people? I've heard the argument that biracial progress is coming at the expense of blackness, and that's really heartbreaking to me because what benefits us does not necessarily benefit all black people. And so it's really important that as a mixed community, as biracials, that we really speak up about this and say something. Not in a light-skinned savior way, but at the very least, we need to say like, hey, this is unacceptable and we're not going to stand for it.
If you find something wrong with that sentence, there's something wrong with you, not me.
What if I said I agree with you? What if I said I agree with you and I'll even give you this? Every elected official needs to believe this in order to properly fulfill their position as an elected official of the United States. So if that's the case, let's talk about that. You said that political differences are crucial for a thriving democracy. So when one candidate couldn't accept the results of the previous election, and not only couldn't accept them, but incited an insurrection because he could not accept them, I agree with you.